괜찮아요? I said too long.
안녕하세요. 영어똑띠입니다. 이번 영상은 이전 영상에서 노세현 씨 영국 발음에 감탄해주시는 분들이 많아서 노세현 통역의 두 번째 편을 제작하게 되었습니다. 이번 통역은 진짜 저세상 통역, 완전 극한 직업이다 라고 표현할 정도의 최고 난이도의 통역이었답니다. 아무리 옥스포드대를 나온 수재라지만 통번역을 전공하지도 않았고 전문 통역사도 아닌데 이 정도 통역을 할 수 있는 실력에 한번 놀라고 듣고 한국말로 그대로 얘기하라고 해도 못할 정도의 많은 문장을 노트 테이킹하며 이창동 감독의 말의 의도를 그대로 다 전달했다는 것에 두 번 놀랬답니다. 이번 영상은 이창동 감독의 유아인 스티븐 연이 주연을 맡았던 영화 버닝으로 2018년 런던 아시아 영화제에 초청되었을 때 초록물고기, 박하사탕, 오아시스, 미량 등 이창동 감독의 회고전이 열렸을 때 한 인터뷰 영상입니다.
아웃사이더에 대한 이야기를 두 사람의 사랑 이야기를 해보고 싶었던 것이죠. 그 문소리의 연기 이야기는 다음에 할게요.
So I didn't deliberately set out to make a story about outsiders when I started making Oasis. My motivation for making this film is a bit complicated, but to explain, I went to Cannes Film Festival for the first time with my film Peppermint Candy, and I think the atmosphere for me there was very surprising. There was this very glorious sunshine, this very sort of dazzling Mediterranean Sea, and many people around the red carpet, and this very sort of sparkly festival. And I think for me that was a very unfamiliar space. I had this impression that people from all around the world had gathered in order to enjoy film as fantasy, that everybody was enjoying film as a fantasy there. And I thought, what kind of fantasy is my film being experienced as for these people, and what kind of fantasy can I make in film? So I wanted to make a fantasy film in a sense. And I think to get people to ask questions about this, I had to really tell a love story, because that is the most common experience that's intensely subjective and strongest fantasy that ordinary people have. So for the person in love, because it's so subjective, it's experienced as love, but for others it could not be seen as love. From other people's point of view, it could be seen as very unacceptable as being love. And this is why I wanted to tell that story. So in the film, you have this man that's very much abhorred and despised by society, and this woman who's not only disabled, but people don't really want to put their attention on her because of her body movements, and it's a result of a cerebral palsy. So I wanted to show the love story between these two characters.
소설가로 활동하다가 영화 감독이 되기를 결심했냐 이렇게 물으셨는데, 그래서 그 다른 길이 저한테는 영화 만드는 일이 됐던 것 같습니다.
So you've asked the question of why I've decided to make films instead of continuing to be a novelist, and I don't think I've actually made a decision that I'm going to start making films. I think to explain why I became a film director is a very complicated and long story. But what I think I can say is that when I was in my late 30s and I was approaching 40, when I thought of myself as a novelist and as a person, I think thinking about the path that I was on, I didn't feel like I wanted to continue walking down the same path. In the East, this Chinese philosopher had said, once you turn 40, you can no longer be seduced. And I think for me, it was actually quite the opposite. On the contrary, when I turned 40, I basically started questioning and having thoughts, queries about the path I was on and about my life. And I think for me, I felt that I didn't want to continue down this same path, but try a different path. And for me, that was making films.
제 첫 작품 그린피쉬는
갱스터들의 논리와 닮아 있지 않는가라는 문제의식이 함께 있었습니다.
So when I made my first film, Greenfish, yes, you can call it a gangster genre film. when I was making that film at the time in 1970 Korea, the Korean film industry, you could say, was really at rock bottom, that people would very openly say wouldn't pay any money to go and watch films, and actually films were very distant from audiences. So in order to make my first film and to make my film debut, to make this possible, I thought that I would have to bring in a very conventional genre format and a frame around it, but add the gangster element so it would be at least entertaining and enjoyable for the audiences. But what I wanted to show in that film, as you'd mentioned, was questions around identity. So as you see, the character who's living in this very traditional sort of countryside farming town goes through mass-scale redevelopment, and it turns into and transforms into this new space, into a city. And I thought that when these spaces changes and transform entirely, that this happened generally across Korea as well. So in the film, the character lives in a place called Ilsan, which is also where I live, where the countryside turning into this new city must also have an impact and raise questions about the people's identity who live in those spaces. And these were the thoughts I had that when I was making the film. And what I really wanted to say in the film was that although it is a gangster genre film, as we said, that the changes that came about in Korean society, regardless of the method of the way, the main driving force really is to promote economic development and increase wealth. And I thought that logic was very similar to gangsters' logic in the way that society was operating, and I wanted to raise questions about that.